Sorry Now, Paul Turner Mystery, Book 1. Author, Mark Richard Zubro. Publisher, St. Martin's Press, New York, 1991. Narrator, Eric Aust. Chapter 6. The next morning, Paul gave Brian permission to go with his friends to the amusement park, Great America, after his exam. Brian's summer job with the Chicago Park District didn't start for a week, and this was his last final. But Jeff still had 3 days of school, and the two boys squabbled over this disparity at breakfast until Paul had to declare a truce. Paul found himself unaccountably smiling from time to time. Meeting Manfred again felt good. He'd definitely call him when he got a minute as Paul eased his way through rush hour. The weatherman confirmed the bright blue skies and seemed almost apologetic about the false tornado watch alarm the previous day. The cold front had stalled for at least 24 hours at the Mississippi River. When it moved southeast, the weather in the entire state could get dangerous. The miserable early morning temperature held in the low 80s, an unpleasant harbinger of sticky sweat all day. No breeze disturbed the half-raised shades of the open windows of the squad room. Grumbling about the heat took up a large part of the conversation at roll call. Besides the usual Wednesday inspection of equipment, weapons, and ammunition, they endured the routine of current cases, reports that needed to be noted, who had to be reminded of court dates, crimes or criminals from the previous shifts. They needed to be aware of announcements of recent directives, lists of wanted persons and vehicles, and stolen auto messages. After roll call block, the case sergeant cornered Fenwick and Turner away from the others. "We're getting a lot of pressure on this Mugglerath daughter case." "A lot. We've got to get something." "We don't have anything," Fenwick said. "Well, you better soon. I'm not risking my ass for some two-bit preacher's daughter. Find something. Anything. At the least, we've got to tell the press we've got some suspects." Fenwick said, "We could round up the usual suspects." Block said, "Don't get cute with me. Just get me some results." Block stalked off. At their desks, Fenwick muttered, "Double and triple fuck. What does that number nuts think we're doing?" Turner sighed. "If we even had a glimmer of a direction to go in, it would help. We knew this would get political. It's happened before. We'll find it out." "I wish we could get some kind of break," Fenwick said. Then they began working on more paperwork. At 10, Ian called. "I just got an anonymous tip about Donald Mucklerath," Ian said. "It's real strange. I'm not sure I believe it." "What?" Turner asked. "My source says that Donald is gay." "And why is that significant?" Turner asked. "Supposedly there's been a big fight about outing him, especially among gays in Chicago." Outing was the method some gay activists used to publicly identify closeted prominent gays and lesbians. One object was especially to make self-hating gay people less likely to do harm to their own. Another reason was to identify positive gay role models. "I'm missing the connection to his sister's murder," Turner said. "I'm getting to it. If he's gay, and if his sister found out, and if she threatened to tell her dad." Turner cut him off. "The evildoer turning out to be a closeted gay guy? Give me a break. You read too many cheap gay detective novels." "But," Ian began. Turner interrupted again. "Besides which, that's an awful lot of ifs strung together. And the sister isn't around to confirm or deny any of the facts." "Now can I talk?" Ian asked. Turner grunted. "I didn't say it was a good theory, or even that I believed it. I just thought you might want to check it out." Turner sighed. "I'm sorry, you're right. It's not much," Ian said. "If Donald was under a strain because he's gay, it could have caused or still be causing problems. You mentioned how strange and closed that group is. Here's your chance to break through and really learn something." Okay. Where'd you find this out?" "One of the guys here at the office, and he didn't remember where he heard it." "Big help," Turner said. Ian thought a minute. "I've got to check on who's who in the outing crowd, but You can start with Nate Robinson. He's a lawyer and head of the largest legit gay political organization in the city. The group is called Come Out for Freedom. Ian gave him details, said he knew the guy, and would call to encourage him to be open when the cops came to talk. Turner hung up and filled Fenwick in. I wanted something, Fenwick said, but this is only a smidgen above nothing. I agree, Turner said, but we've got nothing else. Anything that helps us understand the dynamics in that family might be helpful. So far, we know very little about them. All right, so I'm setting up the meeting, Fenwick asked. Said he'd call me back as soon as he found out anything. While waiting for the call, they turned back to their paperwork. 15 minutes later, Fenwick said, you're humming. Turner looked at him. I am. You are. You've been awful bright and cheery for a fairly fucked up day. You met somebody. What's his name? I didn't think it showed. His name is George. And to answer your other questions, he's a doctor in his early 30s. He's nice, and I'm not in love. You'll have to bring him to the picnic next month, Fenwick said. Madge and I will have to give our seal of approval. We only met a couple of nights ago, Turner said. Let's not have wedding bells yet. He could be secretly married or be having an affair with Barbara Bush. It'll be good for you to get out, Fenwick said. Years ago at the annual Area 10 picnic, Madge Fenwick had introduced herself to Turner. They shared ideals on child rearing and on Buck, who'd become Turner's partner not that long before, at a moment when 7-year-old Brian was wheeling his brother around picnic tables. Madge said to Paul, You're gay, aren't you? Paul said, A homosexual with 2 kids. Long after all the others left that day, the 2 families stayed and talked. The 3 adults sat under an oak tree and let the evening darkness gather around them. The smaller kids fell asleep on a nearby blanket. Brian played by himself on the baseball field, throwing the ball up, hitting it, then retrieving it, getting as many hits out of the bat as he could before the fall of night stopped him. Madge had a nephew who was gay. Buck's attitude was that Paul was a good partner and a friend. Paul liked their down-to-earth good nature. They'd been friends since that day. An hour later, Ian called back. He'd set up an appointment for 3 o'clock. Robinson taught classes at Oliver Wendell Holmes Law School most of the day and wouldn't be free until then. Fenwick and Turner grabbed a late lunch at a deli on the corner of Dearborn and Congress, and then walked over to their interview. Oliver Wendell Holmes was a small law school located on 6 floors of a high-rise on State Street, a block north of police headquarters. The building contained old-fashioned elevators with manual controls. The elevator operator deposited them on the 6th floor after 2 tries at making the car floor level with the hallway. Finding the office door with Robinson's name on it, they knocked. Seconds later, a man in his early 30s wearing a dark gray suit answered. Introductions over, they sat in the narrow office. Books lined the 2 longer walls. The window in the 3rd wall opposite the door looked out onto the grimy exterior of the rear of the next building. Robinson sat in a swivel chair facing them. They sat in old wooden chairs with the varnish long since rubbed off by numerous student bodies. Turner noted the cut of the man's suit, which clung to his body in ways that Turner suspected came from the finest tailoring. They explained the reason for their visit. Robinson spoke in a pleasant tenor. I got a call from Ian. I trust him. He pointed at Turner. He said you're gay, but that your partner isn't. Is that important? Turner asked. That's for you to decide. A gay cop seems suspicious to me on general principles. Fenwick said, If you want to give him a morals lecture or your opinion on which profession he should have chosen, why don't you do that, and then we can get on with what we came to ask. Robinson gazed at Fenwick calmly. The silence between them built until the lawyer said, I guess you're right. What can I tell you? Do you know anything about Donald Mucklerath being gay? Turner said. It's been a rumor for a while. He's not married, and he's in his 30s. Always a sure sign, Turner said. Robinson smiled. Yeah, that and going to the opera. He cleared his throat. Anyway, I never paid much attention to the rumors. I assumed it was wishful thinking. on the part of a few gay activists who would enjoy the irony of a prominent homophobic person's kid turning out to be gay. Frankly, I'd enjoy it too, but I think the possibility is remote. I certainly have no proof. He shrugged his shoulders, then asked, I'm curious, how would his being gay be connected to his sister's murder? I honestly don't know, Turner said. We're looking for any kind of information we can get on the family. If he was being outed, maybe it had a strong effect on those people. Our group isn't into outing. That kind of thing is bullshit. People have the right to lead their own lives. We fight to improve the lives of gay people in a lot of ways, but not that shit. He gave them a lecture about the good things his group had done with legislation, lawsuits, and domestic partner insurance regulations. They left a few minutes later with no further information in the car. Turner said, Let's go ask him. Him who? Fenwick said. Donald. We're going to walk in and ask him if he's gay. Why not? Turner asked. In the Mucklewrath suite, they found Donald in the company of his stepmother, and they told him they wanted to ask him some questions alone. He and Mrs. Mucklewrath insisted he not be alone. Turner didn't press the issue. Fenwick asked, Donald, is it true that you're gay and you killed your sister because she was blackmailing you? Donald looked confused and said, What? Mrs. Mucklewrath shouted, How dare you? What kind of nonsense is this? How dare you barge in to ask such insulting questions? The police commissioner will hear about this. Superintendent, Fenwick said. In Chicago, we have a police superintendent. Mrs. Mucklewrath positioned herself a foot away from Fenwick and stabbed her finger at him. I'll have your badge for this, she threatened. Stars, Fenwick said. In Chicago, we don't call them badges. We call them stars. She stormed from the room. Fenwick said, Well, she isn't always the ice maiden, is she? They turned to Donald. Turner asked, Are you gay? Donald looked at him dubiously. No, I can't imagine where you heard that. I've had lots of women. That's why I'm in trouble, remember? You wouldn't be the first to try to cover up his sexuality by dating women, Turner said. Donald stood up. He said quietly, I'm not gay. A voice spoke behind them. He certainly isn't. They turned. The Reverend Mucklewrath stood in the doorway with his wife next to him. An uncomfortable few minutes followed before Turner and Fenwick retreated to the elevator and then the street far below. The sky remained clear as they walked back to their car, but the wind was up, and with the canyons and eddies the buildings created, they found themselves almost having to bend into the wind. When they settled into the car, Turner said, I think I believe him. I'm fairly good at knowing if somebody's lying or not. I think he told us the truth. Are you sure? No. The radio crackled to life. A disembodied voice asked for Turner. He clicked in to respond. They want you at home, said the voice. It's something about your kids. Mrs. DeLucci called. Turner instantly thought of the threats made to his boys. He dropped all thoughts of the murder investigation. In seconds, Fenwick had the siren screaming and the car roaring through the traffic. At Carpenter Street, Turner leaped from the car before it stopped. He raced into the house to find nothing, then tore next door to Mrs. DeLucci's. Her eldest daughter, Anna Marie, said, Family Center Hospital. The school called. We couldn't get hold of you. She didn't know anything beyond that. Turner, sitting tight-lipped as Fenwick tore down Halstead Street toward the hospital, worried about the possibility that Jeff might have an unexpected problem with his Spina Bifidia. They'd been fortunate the last few years. What was rarely far from the mind of a parent who had a child with a defect was finally happening to him. Fenwick dropped him at the entrance. Turner, familiar with the hospital, quickly found out where his son was. The nurses on duty recognized him. With their usual brisk efficiency, they led him to the operating room. They'd been waiting for him to give approval for an operation. Jeff's shunt had clogged. Most Spina Bifidia children had the shunt to prevent the buildup of fluid in the brain. Occasionally, obstructions worked their way into the opening. Usually there was some warning of a problem, but not always. He found Mrs. DeLucci. She stamped around outside the operating room in a towering rage. She was more furious than he had ever seen her. Mrs. DeLucci said, It was that goddamn school. They know how many times have I told them that if they noticed anything with Jeff, they should call immediately. The teacher this morning thought he had a headache. You don't just have a headache with this kind of child. You watch, you notice. She switched to Italian as she began swearing and berating the school system. She spoke too quickly for Turner to follow all of it, and was pretty sure he missed some of the more obscure obscenities. Turner had fought with the Chicago education system since before Jeff's first day in school. He wanted his boy to have as normal a life as possible. Mostly, the schools weren't set up to deal with anyone unusual or slightly difficult. Most Spina Bifidia children had normal intelligence, but at the least, they needed physical therapy and minor assistance. He'd had to argue for the smallest concessions. Administrator after administrator had placed roadblocks in his path. The neighborhood knew and sympathized, but it took Mrs. Tolucci on the warpath for things to happen. All she did was ask to accompany Paul to one of his meetings with school personnel. She hadn't said anything until the end. Then she said to them, "I came here today to see. That's all I wanted to do. Look at the people who don't have the kindness or the time for a child. Professional people who were supposed to be working for children." She snorted her derision and left with Paul. Within a week, all the obstacles to Jeff's education had melted away. Once Paul tried to ask Mrs. Tolucci what she did, or whom she talked to, all she told him was that she talked to people she knew who cared about kids. She never explained beyond that. If Mrs. Tolucci had connections to help his son, Paul didn't care, and he didn't want to know any more. Mrs. Tolucci calmed down very quickly after she spent her initial volley of venom. She sat until the doctor appeared over an hour later and told them Jeff was fine. Then she left, and Turner went to see his son. On the way down the corridor, he saw George Manford in a white lab coat speaking earnestly to a young couple. The doctor finished with the couple and looked up. Turner closed the space between them and quickly filled him in. Manford accompanied Turner down the corridor. "What are you doing here?" Turner asked him. "I thought you worked with AIDS patients." "I've got a couple of kids here and across the street at Children's Hospital. They were born with it." In the room, Turner gently embraced his still sleeping son. Manford confirmed what the doctor had said. Jeff would be fine. He promised to come back after his rounds, and Turner thanked him, then sat with his boy for over an hour. Jeff had awakened briefly, saw his dad, smiled, and asked for Brian. At 7, Manford came by. He suggested they grab a bite to eat in the hospital cafeteria. They talked for half an hour about Spina Bifidia and people with AIDS as patients. "Hell of a first date," Turner said as they placed their trays near a stack at the exit to the cafeteria. "There'll be more and better," Manford said. Turner watched him walk away. Even with the lab coat, he found the view attractive. He returned to his son's room and sat for another half hour. At 8, Jeff, fully awake and into his favorite TV show, told him, "Dad, you can go home. I'm fine. I get to miss school, so I'm okay." Paul knew the staff would take excellent care of him. And before he left, he stopped at the hospital security office and told them of the threats. The man in charge, a retired cop, told him not to worry, that a security guard would be posted by Jeff's room around the clock. At home, he had messages on his answering machine from Fenwick and Ian. Since he had no way to reach Brian at Great America, he called Fenwick. His partner asked about Jeff, and Turner filled him in. Fenwick asked, "You weren't going to check out that outing shit anymore tonight?" Paul said, "It's not much of a lead, but it'll give me something to do." He knew he shouldn't worry about Jeff, but he probably would. He also knew himself well enough to know he'd probably go through a certain amount of the "why me" syndrome, a minor version of the agony he'd gone through at Jeff's birth. Work would help distract him. He called the paper to see if Ian was in, but got an answering machine. He called Ian's apartment and got his roommate. She told him to try John Chester's. Turner hurried into the humid night. The wind blew at gale force, but still no storms threatened on the horizon. In John Chester's, Turner found Ian singing bawdy songs with a group of pressmen from the Chicago Tribune. Ian saw him and immediately asked, "Oh, what's wrong?" Turner told him about Jeff finishing. "He's fine, but I'm restless. I figured work will keep me occupied. Better to stay busy than brood." He told Ian what they'd learned about Donald. "I doubt he's gay." Turner finished, but I should check every angle. Half the time, the most virulently homophobic people are the most severely closeted. I met him once or twice. I never pegged him as gay. Robinson wasn't much help. I need to talk to the people in the community involved in outing, Turner said. I found some information this afternoon. Some of them as friends. That could be a problem. I've got a murder to solve, Turner said. Maybe several of them. I'm not interested in likes or dislikes at this point. First, Turner called home from the bar to see if Brian was in yet. He got the answering machine, but wasn't worried. On these trips, Brian often didn't get in before 12. In the car, Turner asked, "Where to?" Ian said, "Gil Garrett's place." "Gil's into outing?" Turner asked. "Yep," Ian said. "He's one of the leaders." "I guess I didn't know him as well as I thought." "Gil doesn't tell a lot of people. There are others who get their name in the paper, but he's the brains behind the outfit." Gil Garrett lounged in a silk bathrobe in front of a TV set, watching reruns of 30-something. "Is Donald Mucklewrath gay?" Ian asked him after they'd sat down with drinks. A Diet Coke for Turner. "How would I know?" Garrett took a careful sip from a straight scotch. He leaned back in his recliner, holding his glass in hands folded over his stomach. Turner said, "He's made a lot of homophobic statements in the press, but we need to check out a rumor we heard. He's one of the worst fucking assholes in the country," Garrett said. "If he was one of our own, he deserves to be destroyed. One of our own destroying us, I consider that the highest crime you can commit." Ian put his hand on his friend's arm. "If he's a murderer," he said, "maybe something could convict him. We don't want to get anybody in the community in trouble. We want to get the bastard as badly as you do." Garrett wrenched his arm away from Ian. He prowled the room, pausing to stare at a print of a half-naked baseball player hanging on the wall. Ian asked, "Why all the dramatics? Why not just tell us? It's not that big a secret, is it?" Finally, Gil stopped pacing and faced the two men. He spoke through tight lips. "We've known for about a week. This is our big chance to bust a major homophobe. I know it sounds callous, but I'm not overly concerned about his sister. I'm concerned about the evil he's done to gay people." He sat down. "All right," he said. He sighed. "That little whore, Rusty, the one you had the run-in with the other night, told us he had a date with some rich bastard a few weeks ago. They went to a party at some mansion in Lake Forest. Rusty said Donald was there with a cute young thing. He couldn't keep his hands off Rusty's one of our main sources in finding out about closeted public officials. The Old Whores Network, we call it. Some of them remain loyal to the code and keep silence. Fortunately, Rusty is one of us." "He won't last long in the business with a big mouth," Ian said. "We're very careful, and he's not the only one by any means," Garrett said. "You trust Rusty?" Turner said. "I have independent confirmation that Donald Mucklewrath was at the party." He took a sip from his drink. "We've been trying to get hold of Donald for a week to set up a meeting. We want to talk to him first. We haven't been able to get through. Then with the murder, our plans got delayed. We're going through with this." "I guess we should talk to Rusty. Do you know where he is tonight?" Turner asked. "Working, I suppose. I have no idea where." Turner and Ian left. The reporter had several suggestions about where they might find a working hustler at 10:30 on a Tuesday night. They tried various bars on Clark Street, then on Halstead, but came up empty. Finally, they stopped at Halstead and Addison and walked into the 18th District Police Station. Turner identified himself and told them what he needed. He spent nearly half an hour on the phone, finally tracking down someone in vice control who specialized in male prostitutes. A Detective Kramer recognized Rusty's name. "Yeah, Rusty's the drip," she said. They call him that because supposedly he's given a lot of guys gonorrhea. He's got a larger than usual number of unhappy customers. We aren't actually sure why. It could be because of the disease he spreads. Although most of the hustlers we get are heavily into safe sex. Of course, you know how sympathetic we are with a John who comes in complaining about being ripped off by a hustler. We investigate if there's time after the real complaints. You know how often that is? Turner grunted that he understood. Do you know where he hangs out? Try the Womb on Clark Street. It's a bar a little south of where you've looked so far. That's his normal hangout. Inside a crumbling building, luridly decorated and lit barely above fire code standards, the Womb's clientele slunk furtively from dark corner to dark corner. A year ago, they'd removed the wall, a spotlighted area for viewing the various available young men now all lurked together in the same murky depths. They spotted Rusty conversing with a smiling, bald-headed man, probably in his 60s or 70s. Turner walked up behind him and tapped Rusty on the shoulder. "Fuck off," Rusty said without turning around. The bald man gave Turner an angry stare. Turner took out his star and showed it to the bald man, who, seconds later, scuttled out the door. Rusty swung around and Turner said, "Let's go outside." "Is this a bust?" the kid asked. "Not yet," Turner said. Rusty looked at Ian, but saw no help from that quarter. He gave his shoulders an elaborate shrug and, swinging his narrow hips suggestively, swung toward the exit. On the street, Turner asked, "What do you know about Donald Mucklewrath?" "Nothing." The kid leaned against the building, stuck his fingers through several empty belt loops, raised his right foot so the sole of his shoe lay flat against the building. The pose showed his bulging crotch and slender hips to great advantage. Turner told Rusty what Gil had said. Rusty sneered and said, "So what?" With an effort, Turner stayed calm and tried reasoning with the kid, and then Ian tried threats about arrest. The kid laughed at both of them and said, "Let's get the lawyers out here then. I'm sure I'd be happy to talk to one of them. Until then, I got nothing to say." They gave it up. Turner drove Ian home, then made his way to his own neighborhood. As soon as he walked in the door, he called the hospital. No change in Jeff's condition. The boy was resting comfortably. It was then he discovered Brian wasn't home yet. It was 12:15. Brian didn't have to be in until 1, and he rarely broke curfew. Turner was happy he'd had a few problems as he did with his son, but the anxiety of the emergency with Jeff, coupled with the threats, now made him uneasy. At 12:30, the phone rang. Brian's voice, barely audible over background noise, said, "Dad, Frank's car broke down. We're at the Deerfield Oasis. We can't fix it. Can you come and get us?" At 1:30, Paul pulled up at the Oasis. Brian and his 4 buddies sat outside on the curb, looking woebegone and glum. Brian, his pants encrusted with dirt and grease, stood up when he saw his dad's car. "Sorry, Dad," were his first words. They checked Frank's 1982 Chevette. After a brief look, Paul said, "I can't see the problem. It's too late to try fixing it anyway. Did you all call your parents?" Everybody nodded, except Frank. Turner knew the boy feared his father and suspected Frank's dad abused him. "Oh, want me to call him, Frank?" The 16-year-old nodded. "He's gonna kill me." Frank Farnese grew up with buck teeth and wearing hand-me-down clothing. He'd been a slender little kid, and the clothes came from his muscular older brother. His mom's best tailoring efforts couldn't quite disguise the outsized shape of the clothes he wore. The kid had been teased unmercifully. Braces and teenage rebellion, coupled with the best working car among neighborhood teens, had gone a long way toward making up for his earlier unpopularity. With Frank standing next to him, Turner called. It didn't seem that anybody had noticed Frank wasn't in yet. As Paul explained, Mr. Farnese came more weight. Paul detected stirrings of anger. Paul tried to smooth the way for the teenager. He wasn't sure how much good he did. He hung up and Frank said, "Thanks, Mr. Turner." On the way home, Brian explained what happened. Frank's car broke down about 4 miles north of the Oasis. We waited for a tow truck or a cop to stop by. Nobody showed up for 45 minutes. While we waited, we tried to fix it ourselves. That's how come I'm a mess. None of us is real good at fixing cars. Frank doesn't keep any tools in the car, and we didn't have any light. Finally, a tow truck showed up. We got here and we called you and he stopped. Frank finished. We called you because you're cool, Mr. Turner. We knew you wouldn't get all pissed and go nuts. Yeah, Brian said. Paul yawned. Could you try and make it a little earlier next time? After they dropped the other boys at their homes, Paul told Brian about Jeff. Paul liked the instant concern the older brother expressed for the younger. When they finished discussing Jeff, Paul said, I should have taken those threats more seriously. He told Brian about the developments. I want to take a few chances as possible. I'd like you to stay around the house and be as alert and aware as you can. Brian said, Do you really think there's any danger? I hope not. But I don't want to risk it. I'd like you to stick close to home. Besides, Paul continued, the garage needs cleaning, and you could spend the next couple days straightening it out. Brian argued briefly that he was being punished for something he had no control over. Okay, Paul said. We'll work a deal, like usual. I'll help some if I can. A deal might mean money, but often meant a trade in chores. Finally at home, on their way upstairs, Turner said, I'm glad you're okay. I was worried, Brian mumbled. Dad, I know. Turner didn't embrace him. His son's teenage ethos prevented that, but he gave Brian's shoulder a paternal squeeze. The next morning, with less than 4 hours of sleep, Turner drove to the hospital to check on Jeff. The boy was awake and eating breakfast. He greeted his dad by saying, Why couldn't this have happened during school? I could have had a good time while I have to miss a lot of summer stuff. Paul wasn't certain. Told him he'd have to ask the doctor. They chatted briefly and then Turner left for work. At the station, everyone asked how Jeff was. They got through roll call with little morning grumbling that day. Too many murders, along with the heat and humidity, kept everyone pretty subdued. Even Carruthers kept quiet for longer than 5 minutes at a stretch. Turner reported on his visits the night before. The commander came in and they brought him up to date on all the recent incidents. Do you think the Kankakee, Schomburg, and the Bishop's problems are connected to the murder? Maybe, Turner said. It could be some new group taking vengeance on some of the most vocal right-wing people around. Tough to make a connection. He added the information about the non-lethal incidents that Ian had brought to his attention. At the end, the commander said, Don't close off any assumptions. Investigate the murder and monitor those other problems. It's probably not connected, but you never know, so check it out. Also, I know how this next part screws everything up, but I have to tell you. The political pressure to solve this woman's murder is intense. I'd sure like to be able to report good news soon. He left. Turner and Fenwick didn't waste time getting angry at the commander. What was the use? He was simply stating a reality they all knew too well. Turner poured himself some coffee and sat at his desk, preparing to start his calls. He wanted to follow up on Ian's information. On top of his desk, he found Wilmer's autopsy report. He thumbed through each page. Listen to this, he told Fenwick, who'd been hunting for 5 minutes for a spoon to stir the sugar in his coffee. Fenwick did this every morning. One time, Turner tried tying a spoon to the handle of his partner's desk drawer. Fenwick had lost it within 15 minutes. We got part of Wilmer's medical records. He tested positive for HIV antibodies, Turner said. Fenwick looked up. Is that what killed him? Turner flipped a few pages. Nope. He didn't drown either. No liquor in his stomach or in his bloodstream. The guy must have been sober. Somebody knocked him over the head. Couldn't have gotten the bump from the fall. If we hadn't been suspicious, we'd probably never have found this out. We need to try to track Wilmer's movements on Saturday. I think he's the key to this whole mess. Under Wilmer's report, he found a note from the gang crimes unit. He called them organized crime and narcotics. He got the same answer from all three. They put out feelers and got nothing. Nobody was pissed off at cops this week. Seconds after he hung up, the phone rang. Ian said, I think we got another one down at the Hilton. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.